All right. And I think we can get started. Dr. Lopez, if you can just introduce yourself and what you've been working on and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Ann Lopez, and I started the Center for Farmworker Families. In terms of my background, I taught at, well, I have 3 degrees. One, I have a biology degree from UC Riverside. I have a master's from UC Santa Barbara in environmental biology. And then I completed a PhD in 2002 at UC Santa Cruz in environmental science. And what I did for my research is I studied the migrant circuit between West Central Mexico farming communities and Watsonville and Salinas, California farm workers. And I studied the impact of the North American Free Trade Agreement on the farms in Mexico. What I discovered, I was basically horrified about. I was shocked that I was a member or a citizen of a country that would cause so much inordinate pain and suffering. And as I interviewed people on the farms in Mexico and their family members who had fled to the US, I found pain everywhere I went. And what I didn't see in the news was any information about how the US had propelled this horrible migration that was basically destroying the sustainable farms of Mexico. For thousands of years, people in Mexico farmed with the corn, bean, and squash intercrop sustainably. If you can read the science about how those 3 crops have mutualistic symbiotic relationships, and that's why the corn production is much higher than it would be if you grew corn by itself. So it was a very successful system that sustained the culture for years and years. And even though people were poor, they were well fed and they managed for thousands of years without pesticides, without any of that. Well, the Mexican government had a system of tariffs at the border at the time. This is prior to 1994 when NAFTA went into effect. And that protected these small farmers in Mexico, millions of them. And so if we in the US wanted to take corn into Mexico, we would get stopped at the US border and they would weigh the truck and then they'd say, you owe so much in tariffs. And it was high enough so that we didn't take our corn into Mexico, which meant that Mexico's sustainably produced corn was protected from all of the hybrid and GMO corn that was grown here. Well, as soon as the US developed world dominance in corn production, we wanted to get our corn into Mexico. So the goal was to get rid of the tariffs at the border so our corn could be freely transported into the Mexican countryside. And so there was a tremendous push to do this. In 1992, Clinton signed the order to have the North American Free Trade Agreement go into effect. And the original goal was to have the tariffs gradually diminished over a 15-year period so the farmers could find alternative employment. Well, in fact, all of the tariffs were gone in 30 months. And so there was mass disorder and disruption in the countryside because now what happened is the US corn was being dumped by the ton load into Mexico and undercutting the price that the farmers had always gotten for their corn. Excuse me. So this effectively deprived the farmers of their livelihood. And they had really no choice because there was no way to feed their families. If they tried to sell their corn, it was considered too expensive and people would go for the cheap US GMO corn. And not only that, all of the pesticides and fertilizers and everything like that, those synthetic amendments were also transported into Mexico. And so what happened was there was a mass exodus from the countryside of at least one or two members of each family. And they had really three choices. They could stay on their farms and starve. And some of them that I talked to two families in my research that decided to do that. They said, we've been here for generations, we're not leaving. And so ultimately they potentially could starve. Another set of families decided to send someone to Mexico City to look for work and send money home. And if you've been to Mexico City in the last, excuse me, 10 years, oh dear, I'm sorry, I've got a call here. Let me turn it off. What you'll find is that if you go up in an airplane, you can't see the edge of the city. Whoops, what am I doing here? There we go. There. You can't, it's much easier if I can stand up in front of an audience. No phones ringing, no lampshades going off. Anyway, so anyway, if you go to Mexico City and go up in a plane, you can't see the edge of the city. It's one of the most populated cities. And that's because it's ringed with shanty towns of these farmers who have left their land and are looking for work in Mexico City. I think Mexico City is either the second or third largest city now in the world as a result of this influx of farmers. And then, of course, the third choice is to make an undocumented border crossing to the US. Then President Salinas de Gortari estimated that 1 million farmers would leave their land every year for the first 15 years of NAFTA. Now, no one ever discussed where these people would go, but we have 11 million undocumented people in the US today, many of them what I call economic refugees of NAFTA. And depriving people of their livelihood is against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's a whole article about that. So these families then became separated. That, you know, a male member typically would come here, send money home, and then the family left in Mexico would hope that one day they could return. Well, when I would go to the countryside and visit these families, they would plead with me to find the person because many of them disappeared or they remarried and started other families here or whatever. It was just, I mean, it was a humanitarian disaster. And I was shocked, to be honest. I knew, you know, the role, I started with Farmworkers and I knew they had a bad time, but I had no idea that it extended binationally like this. And so I was finishing my dissertation and I had decided originally to go to a 4-year institution and continue the research and continue to teach, but I had an epiphany. I realized that I had to do something about this, that the American public had a right to know about this kind of nonsense. And there was almost nothing in the news at the time about this horrible disaster that was going on. So that's when I just let go of that dream of being a college professor or a university professor and set out to educate the public. And I just started speaking everywhere. And all my years of biology teaching at San Jose City College came in really handy because I knew how to speak in front of groups and so on. So over time, we started figuring out, a group of people joined me. We started figuring out what the needs were both in Mexico and here, and working binationally to do what we can to alleviate the misery. And from that, it led to the development of a 501c3 nonprofit, and that's where the Center for Farm Worker Families comes from. Now, as far as what we do, our mission is to inform the public. That is the biggest, that's our biggest hallmark. And then beyond that, to make life as good as possible for farm workers and their family members in Mexico. And then beyond that, to identify the legislation that keeps farm workers oppressed, and to basically declare war on it and get it changed. And we've had some success in that area. So we do, in terms of what concrete activities, prior to COVID, we were doing farm worker reality tours, and we would take groups of people, students, classes, general public, whoever, out to a farm in Watsonville. That's an organic agroecological farm. And we standing in the farm, we could point to the 3 different ways that strawberries were grown in Watsonville. Industrial farming, which is all pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and then supposedly organic industrial, which is basically still rows and rows of the same plant, but rather than using pesticides, they use a structure called a bug vac, where they vacuum all of the bugs, good, bad, or indifferent, out of the rows to keep any predation on the plants limited. And then finally, the farm itself is agroecological regenerative, which is the way I believe we need to move.
And what is the name of that farm?
Crystal Bay Farm. Oh. It's on 40 Zills Road in Watsonville. It's beautiful. So it's off San Andreas Road, off Highway 1. So if you get a chance, visit it. It's a beautiful place. And at the farm, what we did was we had an undocumented Oaxacan family come and talk to the people that came. Usually we get from 20 to 40 people, about their undocumented border crossing and what they went through to get here. And then the husband would demonstrate strawberry picking there so that people could actually see that there was a skill set involved. It's not just workers in the field bent over yanking berries. I mean, there's a whole skill set that one has to learn in order to be a strawberry picker. And then from there, we went to the migrant camp, and people talked to us about life in the migrant camp and how they come back April 1st. They have to leave and move everything out of their apartment in November, and then go 50 miles away at the time, and then come back. We've changed that. I'll just add that. And then, yes. And then finally, we went to a farm worker's home that she shares with, I think, 5 or 6 other people. She's an excellent cook, and she would fix us a meal, and we talk about immigration reform. So that was our farm worker reality tour, and they were so popular. We were doing them every Sunday afternoon. It was great. And then COVID came. And so now we can't do them. And I was depressed every Sunday for a while till I got used to it. I thought, this is so frustrating. So we do that. And then I discovered in integrating myself in the Oaxacan community, I visited a family in February after heavy rains, and their daughters were crying for food. They had 2 young daughters, and they were ignoring them. And finally, I stopped the conversation. I said, give them some food. and they looked down at the ground like they were really ashamed. And I went over and opened their refrigerator, and there was one head of lettuce, 1/3 gallon of milk, and 2 Jello cups. And that's all the food in the house. And I said, "Where's your food? We don't have money, so we can't buy food. Nobody's working." And I said, "Well, is this just you, or is this the whole community?" "No, the whole community, the whole Oaxacan community is hungry." And I think that if I hadn't discovered that and done something about it, we might have had young children dying from starvation. It was just tragic. And so I called the Community Action Board in Watsonville. They called the Second Harvest Food Bank, and that afternoon they brought out food for 144 families. Yeah, so that no one had to starve anymore. So then, because they're all undocumented, they're terrified of, seeking any kind of public benefit. So from that, we realized what we need to do is start offering food at least monthly, so people don't have to go, farm workers don't have to be hungry. So we started what we call distributions of food and household goods. And the second Friday of every month, we have a huge distribution of food and household goods. We had a flu shot clinic. We've done that twice. We have a vegan group that comes and gives free vegan meals. We have a group that does what they call womb care, where they give products to women. I mean, there's been this outpouring of people in the community doing wonderful things to help farm workers, which is very it warms my heart. I guess that's the word. And so our next one is this Friday, if anybody's interested in coming. We have 4 locations, what we call hidden locations, that we rotate among so that people feel safe. And we usually get about 400 families coming. So, it's very comforting to know they'll have enough food and household goods, the things they need for the upcoming month, especially in the winter, because there's no work like now. Then we partnered with the Community Foundation because the income from wages this last season was terrible. It was half to 2/3 what their normal impoverished wages were. And so, I was very concerned. I thought we're going to have homeless farm worker families on the streets. And then the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County started getting donations to help with rent. And they've given us rent assistance since October every month. So we're now staging what we call rental assistance check writing celebrations. And we have 60 farm worker families at a time come and get a check for $1,000 to help them with rent. And then at those, like yesterday, we had the San Gregorio Orthodox Church people bring literally pounds and pounds of rice, beans, and masa, and warm jackets for women, because many of them don't have them. And so we're going to have our next check writing on Sunday. And we'll also pass out, with the check, we'll pass out bags of rice, beans, masa. So there's food always available. That's our goal. So we do that. And then we connect with families here. And then if they have relatives they're concerned about in Mexico, we go and visit them in the countryside. Now, we haven't been able to do that because of COVID this year. Also, from what I'm hearing, the conditions in Mexico are getting more and more dangerous and precarious. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but at the very least, we can send funds to the families to buy medical assistance or what it is they might need. Then we, as I mentioned, we go after the legislation that holds the oppression into place. And this 50-mile regulation is one example. because I could think of no reason at all other than to keep people from becoming educated. I mean, it's really amazing how the system's set up to keep farm workers in their place and the future generations of farm workers. I mean, it really infuriates me. So what I saw was that children in the migrant camp were going to at least 2 schools every year. They would fall further and further behind. No one graduated from high school. And so they had a choice of becoming farm workers like their parents or joining gangs in Watsonville. And I just felt this was completely unacceptable, because another goal we have is to educate any farm workers or their children that want education. I mean, we buy computers. I even gave one farm worker's daughter, her name is Jasmine Fernandez. She was accepted to Cal State Sacramento. And I think she's the first one I've met that was accepted to a 4-year college, but she didn't have a computer and she didn't have a bed. So I gave her my bed. I thought anybody that's made that big of a leap deserves a bed, more than I do even. So I gave her my bed and I bought her a computer. And now she's in a PhD program. And what she wants to do is become a doctor and start a clinic for young Latinas where the incidence of suicide attempts are 1 in 6, which is terrible. 1 in 6 young Latinas, terrible. So anyway, back to the 50-mile regulation. So I met a couple of attorneys who felt like I do and amassed some other support and started speaking out about this. We made a PowerPoint and of farm workers in the camp with their testimonials about how inconvenient this is and how frustrating that their kids can't become educated, et cetera. We took it to Sacramento. And ultimately, we went up to Sacramento. I went personally for 7 different meetings, and I kept asking the question, what is the purpose of the 50-mile regulation? Because I knew perfectly well they could wave a magic wand and it would be gone. And no one gave me an answer. I've never gotten an answer to that, although I'm very suspicious, as I mentioned. And so then what happened is Eleni Kounalakis, who's the current lieutenant governor, came to Aptos and gave a talk. And I went to the talk and she asked me what I do. And I told her, she said, I'd love to meet some migrants. Great. So I put her in my car, took her over to the migrant camp, had her listen to the stories of the most vocally against the 50-mile regulation. And she was so upset by the stories, she called the attorney general from the person's apartment. and then wrote me a couple of emails later saying Governor Brown is going to put that on a recent bill and it will be eliminated. And it was. So I realized that sometimes you have to go around the proper channels to accomplish what the goal is. And so that was one of our wins. And you were mentioning pesticides. I did a lot of work studying agroecology at UC Santa Cruz. They have a whole center for agroecology and sustainable food systems. Apprentices come from all over the world to learn the techniques. And there are many articles written about how if we got rid of all pesticides tomorrow, we converted to agroecological regenerative agriculture, we could feed the whole world's human population. And I thought, well, then why do we need these pesticides? They're poisoning people, poisoning the environment. In fact, the World Wildlife Fund just came out with a statistic. We have lost 2/3 of the wild animals on this planet since 1970. Now, if we as humans think we can survive this kind of unsustainability, we're nuts. I mean, this is crazy. So we're starting to talk about beginning a campaign to eliminate all pesticide use in Santa Cruz County. And part of that is because I am sick and tired of visiting families who have children that have ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, learning disabilities, and cancer. In fact, a nurse said that half of the children in the pediatric oncology wing of Stanford Medical Center are from the Salinas Valley, from your area. I mean, this is disgraceful. What kind of nonsense is this? You steal the child's life. I mean, they can die, for God's sakes. So I've been really angry, and I think what really broke the straw that broke the camel's back was a woman called me about needing rent assistance because her husband and daughter were going to be in the hospital for Christmas. So when she came to pick up the check in Watsonville, I asked her if she was going to have a good Christmas. And she said no, because we moved and we're closer to a field now, and my daughter has developed blood cancer. So my husband and daughter will be at Stanford Medical Center for Christmas. And I thought, you know, this is bullshit. I've been hearing about this for 25 years. I mean, this has got to stop. So we're looking at a way that we can push through for at least one county the elimination of these awful pesticides. And, you know, if the farmers want to still grow their crop, they can go learn how to do it at UC Santa Cruz. It's right here in our own county. So that's one of our campaigns that I just feel extremely passionate about. And then beyond that, my feeling is that farm workers' lives could be completely transformed if we had comprehensive immigration reform. No farm worker who's been working in the field weeks, months, and years should be worried about deportation. Who's doing who the favor? I mean, they're feeding us, they're feeding the nation, they're feeding even other parts of the world. Why are we putting this kind of torturous worry on their shoulders? And they all the ones that are undocumented, which are most of the ones we deal with, are terrified that their families are going to be torn apart. I just think it's unconscionable and immoral. So that's one thing I hope Biden will rectify. Number two, they need a living wage. No one doing this hard work should be living in the kind of on the edge poverty that I've seen everywhere in Watsonville and Salinas. We need to correct that so that they can pay their own rent, buy their own groceries, etc. And finally, they need a contract with the grower they work for so that the grower cannot steal their wages. And this goes on all the time. I mean, stories of a whole family's season's wages stolen, and they had to borrow money to survive till the next season, while the grower declared bankruptcy, shut down his operation, and bought a big house in central Watsonville. It's unconscionable. So these are some of the things we're working on. And any type of injustice that we see, we work to correct. Another is there was no Wi-Fi in the migrant camp. So that meant maybe the 50-mile regulation is gone, but now the kids can't learn because there's no Wi-Fi. So I started raising hell about that. And then a donor donated, I think, $500,000 to the community foundation, which is going to put Wi-Fi in everybody's unit in the migrant camp. And another goal we have, in fact, I was meeting with community leaders just prior to COVID, and then the meeting got canceled, but we want half the units in the migrant camp to be for permanent housing, because I know families that have been moving in and out now for 25 years. I mean, no one should have to do that. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So anyway, these are some of there's a lot of work to be done. And what I want to see is a conversion in Santa Cruz County of all industrial agriculture, heavily pesticided industrial agriculture, to agroecological regenerative agriculture. I want our county to represent that. It's absolutely not okay with me that we have a semi-slave labor force working just 14 miles from where I live, and that they're being they're the most subjected population to the impacts of pesticides. I just think it's cruel. So that's a brief summary of, or maybe an extended summary. I don't even know what time it is, but anyway, that's what we do.
Thank you. Thank you. And we did have some questions while you were talking. Corinne, I know you had a few. Did you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, I think my main one, like, thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing this. It's really great work that you do. I have two questions. One is what pathways you think you are creating to help youth be a part of this conversation, empowering?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
What are pathways you think that can be created to empower youth to be a part of this drive and conversation?
Well, we have a group at Midi High School of students. I think, let's see, Sebastian is a junior. He organized the students to collect the goods that farm workers need. There's a list of household goods that farm workers are most in need of. And he and 5 of his classmates are coming over to the distribution on Friday to pass these things out.
Where's Midi? Are you talking about the private school Midi?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my question really is more focused on the local youth that are in the camps. What are ideas you have for empowering the youth that live there in these conversations, not just being receivers, but I think that's a conversation that is also really interesting to look at.
In the migrant camp specifically? Or do you mean just in the whole Watsonville, Salinas area, or?
Either.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that just imparting the knowledge that we need everyone on board to save the planet, to get rid of poisons that are destroying the biosphere, and to create a life-affirming environment. And I think that anything people can do, some people have, I know that some schools have programs, I guess like SoCal High, where they actually practice agroecology. So that would be one. I think organizing youth to go to city council meetings, county board of supervisor meetings in mass, and pushing politically. We have to push the status quo. It's not working. We must push the status quo. And so I think organizations of students that are doing that, we have the climate change, Students for Climate Change, or what, rectification or whatever. I mean, there's many different groups of students that are realizing that what's the Thunberg, what's her first name? I forgot.
Greta Thunberg, Greta, yeah.
Yeah, Greta, look at what she's doing. She's spoken at the UN. We need groups of students to join together and demand that their future be sustainable in whatever club or form it takes.
That's great. Well, thank you. And my second question was really tied to data. So I really admire your push to make Santa Cruz pesticide free. I think that's super important. I myself come from an ag family in Hawaii, and there was no data tracking. So many people had cancers, but you could never prove anything. And so I don't know a lot of my family because of that. Back in the day, they used arsenic, they used mercury, they used all kinds of stuff in cane and pineapple growing. So my question is, and I just threw a report into the chat that says that it is estimated about 75% of the data is missing, underreported. So they say that ag worker injuries and deaths are estimated 75% underreported. So basically there is no data. So what's the data that we can bring to the table when we were asking to eliminate pesticides. And I loved how you referenced that oncology at Stanford, because that's a data point, is that the fact that 50% of those come from the Salinas area. What are other data sets you're using? Because it sounds like you're successful in pushing these conversations at the state level. So I would love to know what reports you're using. I think it'd be great to share those with teens.
Right, right. Well, most of mine is anecdotal, to be honest with you. I just take the people like this woman whose child and husband are going to be in Stanford with the blood cancer, and just have them tell their story. I mean, and then have people there at whatever county council or board of supervisor demanding that this change, that the incidence of these things are too common in farm worker populations, and we need to stop the nonsense now. Now, as far as looking up, you can go on NAWS, National Agricultural Workers, is it Service? NAWS, and I think they can give you the actual data that you need. I have some in my book. I wrote a book, The Farm Worker's Journey, here, and I have a whole section on GMO crops and pesticides. And then you can call Jacob's Heart in Watsonville and talk to Lori Butterworth. She developed Jacob's Hearts to deal with the families that have children with cancer in Watsonville. And that's another resource. She probably has all kinds of data you could pull from that. And then the other one I highly recommend is, see, I have there, yeah. This is the California, what's it called? California Institute of Rural Studies newsletter. You can sign up for it online, and they always have good data. So those are some resources where you could get current data on how many poisonings, where, et cetera.
Oh, wow. Well, while you were talking, we did have some other students join the call, and I was hoping that they could introduce themselves and maybe turn your video on for just a moment so we can see your faces. And we can start with Jesus if you're there.
Hello.
You can just say your grade, or your grade, school, and what your plans are.
Hi, my name's Jesus Gonzalez, and I live in Gonzales, California, and I go to school in Gonzales, and I'm in the 11th grade.
Hi, Jesus. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And then Kevin, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hi, my name's Kevin. I'm a senior at SoCo High School, and I live in SoCo.
Great. Welcome.
Do you students have any questions? I know your activity that we're working on is about pesticide awareness, but you can really ask about anything in regards to farm worker families.
I mean, not really. I agree with like literally everything she's saying, because it's just awful that it's like another form of imperialism basically, but within the financial sense that America has a long track record of just economically crippling and stifling with Latin America and different countries within Latin America, and it subsequently causes a mass exodus of just refugees and whatnot. It's just a horrible thing that needs to be stopped.
Well, that, and then this whole thing of poisoning farm workers, I mean, to me, it's absolutely a blatant example of environmental racism. And I mean, why it's tolerated. I just, and I've done some research on the slavery in the South and comparing it to what farm workers experience from the stories that I've heard. And I learned that Southern California was destined to become a slave state, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, they were going to make all of Southern California a state for slavery, Black slavery. Okay, well, that was supposed to be gone, but they figured out a way around it. And that's what we have in the farm worker population today. I mean, in fact, one Black student I had told me that at least if a grower owns the bodies, they generate income, there's an incentive to keep the person healthy. But what we have here in Watsonville and throughout the country is a system where farm workers are discardable. They're expendable human beings. An average life expectancy of 49 years. This is disgraceful, right in our backyard.
Exactly.
Why do people tolerate this? I mean, I'm surprised there's not marches, for human rights. And in fact, now through Californians for Pesticide Reform, we have a campaign to publish the notices of intent. Are you familiar with the notices of intent?
I'm not.
Okay, well, to make it simple, basically when the most restricted, excuse me, pesticides are going to be used and fumigation occurs, the grower has to advise the agricultural commissioner of that county that they're going to do this. Well, what we want is the public informed and this put on a public platform. So any parent that's concerned with their kid, if they know that T-Lone is going to be sprayed tomorrow or chlorpicrin or whatever it is, they can make sure their kid is indoors with all the windows closed or whatever they, maybe leave the area, whatever they need to do to protect their children. But the agricultural commissioners are totally resistant to this. And we're meeting now, I think this week, I'll have to look at my calendar, with Robert Rivas, who I'm sure all of you know, to present legislation that force these agricultural commissioners to publish this information. This is a human right. Why can't we know what we're being subjected to? This would never happen in Los Gatos. You would never have in Los Gatos or Saratoga fumigations of the most restricted pesticides without the parents knowing about it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this has got to stop. These are real live human beings. They deserve the same shot at life as the rest of us, and we are diminishing that. In fact, I had a prof years ago, Juan Palermo at UC Santa Barbara, who wrote a whole article about the binational system of reproduction and production. And he talked about the reproduction of farm workers in Mexico. They come to the United States, become farm workers here. Well, they're not farm workers in Mexico, but they're born there. They come here across the border, work in farm work, die young, and then another set come from Mexico. So it's a binational system of reproduction of farm workers in Mexico and production of capital here in California. And it's a continuing cycle of produce workers, send them north, they get sick, they die, a new set come through, and it's like a cyclical process. I mean, this is disgraceful. I don't know why this is allowed. Maybe it's because people don't know about it.
Well, I had a question in regards to what you're seeing with COVID currently and
Yes.
how that's affecting and changing things for farm workers.
Well, I mean, everybody's afraid that I've talked to. They all are doing their best to do personal distance, the 6 feet thing. But in order to survive rents, they all need to live piled up on top of each other in small units. I have seen multiple families living in less than 1,000 square feet with one bathroom, 16 people. And the farm workers told me they have to line up in the morning to use the bathroom. Now, why can't we provide decent, affordable housing for these people year round, and not just the migrant camp where they come and have to move out? That's another human right that's being violated. So like I said, from what I've observed, no matter where they turn around or what they confront, they're always dismissed or swept under the rug. And this has got to stop. And I am happy to say that when I started this work and campaign 25 years ago, there was absolutely nothing written about farm workers. You would not know they existed other than in the university. You would not know they existed anywhere. I mean, it was completely quiet. And now there are articles constantly in the news, all forms of news about farm workers. So to me, that is a real progress. We're making progress. They're now front and center in people's minds. And when I've had farm worker reality tours and farm workers have told their stories, people in the audience actually cry sometimes. So I think the personal connection really seems to make a difference. And I have to say, you know, I've been getting all these emails about save your nonprofit during the COVID crisis, blah, blah, blah. And we have been thriving. People, you know, and it's because people are now concerned. They know that farm workers have no money for food, no money for rent. They're surviving the winter, and they live and work in treacherous situations. And a lot of people want to do something about it. So that to me has been very encouraging. And more people are getting concerned. So as far as COVID goes, the latest stats that I've seen is that the incidence of COVID among Latinos in South County is 4 times higher than where I live in Felton in North County. And again, that's disgraceful. This, you know, it really speaks to the inequities in terms of health, income, all of it. And this needs to stop. I am tired of seeing the suffering. You have no idea. I just think to myself, how is it we have this population right in our backyard that is under so much stress, so much pain, so much suffering? Somebody's mother's dying in Mexico and they can't go back and be with them, that kind of stuff. This has got to stop. This is inhumane, violates human rights, and it's just not part of a civilized society. And I want to live in a civilized society, not one that's abusive and beholden to slave owners. Forgive my rant, but I feel very passionate about these things. I've seen too much. It's like a friend of mine said, you're in the trenches.
Literally. So you're right about South County for sure. And I know just driving to deliver kits, and I go into Gonzales and I see they post their numbers out in the public. And I watched over a month, the numbers just skyrocket.
Yeah.
And you can confirm, Jesus. I mean, how's everything for, I know your school even closed down, right?
Yes, nobody's allowed on campus, and I do see it because I don't know if where you see the numbers, but if you know, like on the road when you take to my house from the shopping center, the numbers, and it's really accurate. Like they do change it often, maybe not every day, but every 2-3 days they do. And it was like we were at like 60, maybe 90 at one point, and it went to like 700 people at that time. Right now we're at like 90, but over the course of 2 weeks, it skyrocketed in like maybe 600 people. And that's only the people who are like, I'm guessing that, you know, do test, because I know that there has happened where like many people maybe are afraid to like test or just don't want to be tested. But yeah, that's the people who, you know, are registered.
Well, I highly recommend the Frontline program if you haven't seen it, I think it's called COVID and the Farm Workers. And it focuses on 2 big Salinas companies, Taylor Farms and Tanimura and Ontley. And farm workers have no money, so they need to go to work if they can. And when they arrive at those companies without a mask, they're hoping the grower will give them a mask. And the grower tells them that if they need a mask, they have to buy it or resign. And then they complain about being out in the field, bunched up, picking lettuce together. They want social distance. And the grower says, if you need to be away from other farm workers, go to the resignation office. So the people have a choice of working and possibly getting COVID and making money that they can buy food for their family. And that no one should have to make that choice. I think it's disgraceful. Now, in Santa Cruz County, from what I've heard, there's a more humane approach to people. I mean, there are growers giving out masks and definitely trying social distance. The farm workers describe it, but these big companies in Salinas apparently just ignore all of that. And I just, again, to me, it's a violation of human rights. It reminds me of the pesticide companies. I mean, you know that Monsanto and then Bayer produced Roundup, right? Glyphosate, which everybody knows causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which can be deadly. Now, those companies have been fined billions, literally billions of dollars, and they're still advertising. You can buy Roundup in Home Depot today, and no warning on the label, nothing that says may cause cancer, nothing. And I think to myself, if I were responsible for putting out some chemical that murdered thousands and thousands of people, I would be sent to the gas chamber, however they kill people these days. And these companies, which are supposed to be like people, right? Votes like people and stuff, they can put out all this poison. See the movie, what's it called? Dark Waters. Have you seen Dark Waters about the DuPont Corporation? If you're concerned about chemicals in the environment, see Dark Waters. It's on Netflix. I mean, it's very revealing how these companies get away literally with murder for profit. And this leads me to think we need a system that protects the environment and protects people as a priority, and profits have to be secondary. And right now we have the reverse.
Yeah, and it can't be sustainable, because if you want a sustainable system, you have to include labor. You have to make sure people are getting paid living wages.
Yeah. Yes. It's just the humane thing to do. I mean, what have we lost our sense of any kind of compassion and empathy? I mean, that's partly what defines human beings. I think we have to fight for that. These people are just think in their heads about how many dollars and cents. I mean, we've got, it's a mental illness. In fact, I was telling some friends of mine, I think billionaires are addicts because they never have enough money. I mean, if I had $1 million, I would start building farm worker housing. I mean, I don't need a lot of money to be happy. But if you're a billionaire, you must at some point have needed to it's like what do they call it? The land of the hungry ghosts, where there's never enough. It's like an alcoholic. It's never enough. I made my first billion, now my second, and all of that. Who needs that kind of money? It's madness. I mean, it's a mental illness in my mind. Anyway, forgive me.
No, thank you. Thank you. And the name, you said Dark Waters on Netflix. And then there was another thing you recommended, Frontline.
Frontline, COVID and the farm workers.
Farm workers.
If you want to see about COVID and the farm workers, that one's excellent. Yeah.
Definitely. I will look.
Excuse me.
Go ahead, Jesus.
Sorry. Oh, there. Where can I find that other movie, the COVID and the
it was on Frontline. I imagine you could probably Google Frontline, or maybe it's a YouTube thing. I don't know the context, but I'm sure it's somewhere online.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry I can't be more specific.
No problem.
All right. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments? All right. I guess we don't. Corinne, did you have anything to add?
I just want to thank you so much. It's really, thank you for letting me join. This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you for being here. And if you, students that came a little bit later, Corinne actually does a youth program in the Salinas area, and she does biodesign. She has a biodesign team. So you missed her introduction, but I wanted to make sure you knew her.
I just would also love to tap you maybe for the summer. I run a biomaterial bioengineering design camp at Stanford in BioE. And so I'll connect with Leticia about that later. But just,
Great.
you guys are awesome. I love you asking questions, and this is really wonderful. Thank you.
I would also like to recommend ALBA. Have you heard of ALBA?
Yeah.
Associated Land-Based Agriculture. And if you can ever go out and visit their farm, that's another tremendous inspiration, because they take farm workers and convert them into growers, so they have more clout and more control over their lives, which is
I think I took you guys last year. Is that correct?
Yeah, we had a field trip planned, but my school, I don't think we were able to go because school canceled that day due to the flooding.
Oh yeah, Kevin and Rocco, I believe you were there.
And I would just like to say to the students to get your degrees and go out there and raise hell about this. I mean, it's really a time on the planet for all hands on deck. No matter what you can do, how small, how big, whatever, we need change. We need transformation now. So there's going to be a role for you that's critical to this planet's survival and your future. So please, please get your education and get out in the world and start raising hell. That's what's needed.
Yeah, and we want to help you students, so
Yeah,
we want to see you guys succeed and go off to college and all that good
absolutely.
stuff.
Please.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I have a
Wilson.
question.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Is there any like associations or like unions that protect farm workers?
Well, there's the UFW, but I don't know how to say this. You know, I think their focus is on established, documented farm workers, and they've made some decisions like supporting what was it called, HR 5038, which is supposed to be a legislation that makes it easier for farm workers to develop legal status in the country and eventually citizenship. But I read it, and there's three parts to it. One is that. Two is to expand the H-2A program. And if you're interested in the H-2A program, read the Southern Poverty Law Center's report called Almost Like Slavery. And I mean, they lay it all out there that this is a program where growers can essentially own farm workers and rob them of their rights. It's terrible. And then the last part, the third part was to do what's it called? The one where you verify. I'm blanking on the name of it, but E-Verify, that's it. So any farm worker in the entire US has to have an E-Verify card. And I thought, you know, now this is ridiculous, because if a grower has a farm close to the border and needs workers, and workers come across and they're not e-verifiable, the grower's going to hire them. I mean, that's, you know, it's not going to work. So the first part about getting legal status, I mean, it's so complicated and takes so long that a lot of farm workers wouldn't live long enough to get citizenship, given the current situation. And then to expand the H-2A program, oh my goodness, what a nightmare. So that is ridiculous. And then the E-Verify thing. So the UFW supported this. And I even wrote the CEO of the UFW and said, well, how can you do that, given that these facts never got a response? And then I had another time, I had a law firm call me and ask me if I knew why the UFW wouldn't allow farm workers to be at the negotiation table for contracts with growers. And I told him I have no idea. You'd think that they would be welcome at the table. So, you know, I'm hearing these kind of things, and it makes me question what the real intent is. So that's the only union I know that's large in the state. We have no UFW activity that I've ever seen here in Watsonville or in the Central Coast. I don't know, maybe in Salinas you have it. I don't know.
Yeah, we actually have an office here, from what I've seen here in Salinas.
We used to have one in Watsonville, but that one left. So, and then the farm workers who are undocumented, which is the largest population I've seen in Watsonville, they live under threat of being blacklisted or else deported. So they're not going to move toward unionization. And in fact, it's interesting because I have farm workers calling me from the field saying they are fumigating something. We don't know what it is. And by the way, I've never met a farm worker who knows what they're being subjected to in terms of pesticides. I always tell them, ask the grower, what is it? And I will look it up and tell you how to protect yourself. But they won't tell them what it is. And so when somebody calls me, I call the agricultural commissioner to report it. They send out some team to investigate, and the farm workers won't talk about it. And the agricultural commissioner keeps pressing me, who is the farm worker? Tell me. And I said, I can't do that. I can't, I have to respect confidentiality. But they're so afraid of being blacklisted and deported, so they're never going to start a union. They're just an exploitable labor force. It's like a form of slavery. And that's what's so disturbing to me.
Well, I know, Kevin, you were looking into unions and all that stuff. Do you have anything to share from your readings and all your findings?
I just, like she was saying, it's very hard for them to unionize since, you know, to the growers and whatnot, they're just seen as like a cog in the machine that can just be replaced at any time. And it sounds like it sounds and looks just to be like an uphill battle, you know, like if they try to unionize them, they can just be easily replaced. And I really don't know where they can go from there, you know. It's horrible.
I think it's the public's charge. I really do. I think we need to pay more for food if we can. I hope that if people paid a nickel more for a basket of strawberries, all of the farm workers could have a living wage. Well, who isn't going to spend a nickel more for a basket of strawberries so farm workers could have a decent life? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. Yeah.
Challenge is communicating that, like, you know, with so many people not knowing how food is grown, you know, and then how do we ensure that that nickel is actually delivered into the hands of the workers, right? So maybe what we're talking about here is a certification and a way to validate what are the systems to ensure that that funding could get to the workers? I think that's a great idea to add, more to, but already these are like multi-billion-dollar companies. It's not an issue of adding more money into these costs. It's like really distributing more of this incredible amount of profit into the hands of the laborers.
I agree. I agree. I mean, we basically have a corporatocracy where, I mean, they get all the tax breaks and they get the highest income. And even when they're killing people like Monsanto and Bayer, outright murder, they're still allowed to continue to make profits. It's unbelievable.
But I don't think we can be shocked by this. This is the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Right. So I talked to my family, and that, like, going back to the turn of the last century, same thing. It's always been this way. And even past, but agriculture in the United States is based on slavery, however you want to call it, like technical or not. Right. My family in Hawaii, they were identified by a number, not even their last name. And I've mentioned this to my teams in my biodesign challenge. They had something called a bongo. A bongo is a little metal dial with a number pressed in it. And you take that to the company store because your payment was not cash. Your payment was circular to your plantation. Your payment was only to the company store. So you would buy stuff from the store with the money credit that you got from plantation. So part of that drove the people to make their own goods as a way to kind of buck that pain into the store. The reason that the Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, the Hawaiians were able to bust out and unionize is that unlike on the mainland, there was a limited supply of labor. And so when you have that, the power rises over the generations in the labor. But when you have this endless cycle on the mainland, it's really tough. So I think it was Jesus or maybe it was Kevin saying, this looks like it's really an entrenchable problem. I think it can be solved, but Anne, I think you're speaking to some really good policy issues about like that the roots of some of this with NAFTA and the corn. It's not just the corn, of course, it's the labor and how do you create these living wages and how do you create this these statuses, these new legal statuses that empower the labor. And during COVID, a lot of people are living in these facilities that aren't held accountable for what happens to the people with COVID. They won't even tell you which farms they're distributed to because they are distributed to multiple farms. So the ownership of responsibility is distributed. And That's a big part of the problem.
That's right. I agree totally.
Yeah. I can definitely see that a lot. Yeah.
Well, I think though that the public is getting activated and maybe in time, I mean, people have been very concerned about their food being organic, non-GMO. How about socially just? So in fact, I talked to somebody at Whole Foods about that. And that's not where I shop, by the way, but I talked to somebody and I said, why don't you have some kind of display with those 3 criteria? Because I know a lot of the public's concerned about farm workers and they told me they would, but I haven't seen any produce produced with those 3 simultaneous criteria. But that's what I think would really get the ball rolling at least.
That would be great. That's a good idea.
Those 3 things: organic, non-GMO, socially just. Everybody can eat the food and feel good about the fact that the people in the fields are getting a decent shake at life. What we need.
It is. Thank you for saying that. I was actually going to ask what we can do as consumers to support a better system, and that could be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and just talk to the produce manager. In fact, I went down, I shop in my local little organic grocery store here in Felton. It's called Wild Roots Market. And they were carrying Driscoll's berries. And I've read a lot about Driscoll's. In fact, I've even participated in some of the marches about Driscoll's. And then the last straw for me was when David Bacon did a study and wrote an article about how in the subsidiaries in Baja California, they would send the military out to beat the farm workers. And I was horrified. So I took the article to Bert, the produce manager, and I said, you need to get rid of Driscoll's. And so he not only got rid of Driscoll's almost overnight, but on a red piece of paper, he printed the reasons why and hung it from the ceiling right over the new berries that were coming from decent growers. And yeah, no, that was the last straw. I'll probably never eat another Driscoll berry, knowingly at least. Yeah. But I think you can go to your local produce managers and say, this is what we want. You know, there'd be a tremendous market for this. Why don't we have that? We have some things like Swanton Berry Farm strawberries. Those are all organic, and all of the farm workers have a UFW contract. So why can't there be lots of farms with different kind of produce that could supply grocery stores with this third alternative? And I think what we need to do, like I said, I don't know that it can come from the farm workers because they're too scared, but the public, on the other hand, can press. And that's what I've done. Whatever successes I've had for farm workers have just been a result of constant pressure. It took us 8 years to get rid of the 50-mile regulation, but I kept telling the people in Sacramento, we're not going away. This is unjust. We're not going to go away. So if you think we are, you've got another thing coming. So we had protests out in front of their office, signs. I mean, we did everything. And I think you have to do that. It has to come from us.
And yeah, if we can, it should.
Yeah, if we can, right. Or in any way, just a simple request to the produce manager. I want to buy produce that's organic, GMO-free, and socially just. Do you sell such a product?
Oh, are you leaving, Corinne?
I forgot I would take my daughter to a cross-country practice. I was so engrossed in this. Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to meet everyone.
You too. Nice to meet you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for this discussion. I think there are so many things to think about now, and hopefully students, you're interested in learning more about this stuff. I think the important thing is that you're aware, and like you said, the whole point of your organization is to spread awareness around all of these challenges. And so you now are conscious consumers, you can be conscious voters, and when that time comes. So
right.
Yeah. And if you have any questions or you want to you have any follow-up questions that you think of, feel free to email me and I can make sure that gets to Dr. Lopez. And I just really appreciate your talk, Anne.
Oh,
thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me and giving me a chance to rant.
It was good. All right, students, if you can just say bye and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
You all have a great rest of your afternoon.
You too. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.